Welcome back to Swiftly Speaking, folks. My name is Paul Hudson. This is episode 13. Today I'm joined by my friend Ish Shabazz, a well-known indie developer in our community and a well-known speaker. He'll be asking lots of questions about SwiftUI and UIKit from me, but also questions from the audience, folks who are following on live. If you are here live, go ahead and ask questions in the chat. I'll pick up the best and make sure and grill Ish thoroughly on those. But if you are here for the first time, please keep in mind I have zero tolerance for folks who post trolls or harassment or whatever in the chat. There are moderators around who will just ban you for life immediately, so please don't be that person posting junk into the chat window. So this is a very relaxed podcast. It's nice and chilled out. I have questions, you have questions. We'll get through a ton of stuff. It's going to be very exciting. But first, I want to thank our sponsor, who this time is Fernando Olivares, who has a new book helping teach you more advanced skills on Swift to really push your Swift and iOS skills forward. I'll put a link in the description below later on, and you can check it out as Fernando Olivares. Ish, how are you doing, my friend?
How's it going? Doing well.
We've been trying to figure out before recording where Ish's background is, and we still don't quite know. We're thinking it's somewhere in the world. He thinks Chicago. I think somewhere in Europe. I'd love to know, listeners, what your opinion is.
Maybe Europe.
Maybe. Yeah, we're never quite sure.
Yeah, for sure not my actual living room. So, yeah.
So Ish has kids like me, and if you have kids, you know your house will always be just slightly untidy. Somewhere, no matter how hard you tidy, you look around and it's back again. The mess has just reappeared. It's amazing.
And you cannot have a white room like this, so. Yeah.
No,
for sure.
I have dogs, and A, I wouldn't find my dogs, so they're also white, but B, they'd bring muddy paws in. They'd paws, prints everywhere. It'd be a complete disaster show. Anyway, so we've got three big topics to talk about in this show. One is how we can work with SwiftUI and UIKit at the same time. One is your amazing work on indie app development. And one is a topic about a talk you gave recently, programming with purpose. How you can find your own purpose and help others find their purpose too. So let's kick off with our first topic, which is SwiftUI versus UIKit. And this is a perennial topic right now. Everyone wants to know about SwiftUI and UIKit. We're going to have stacks of questions, I'm sure. But let's start with a nice, easy, broad one. Ish, what do you think are the key advantages of SwiftUI versus UIKit?
There are a few of them. One of them is lower barrier of entry. Something I'm always thinking about, even though I've been developing for like years and years now, about like a decade and a half in, I'm always thinking about what it's like for someone who's just learning for the first time. Because one of my favorite things to do is to teach other folks. And SwiftUI just has a much lower barrier of entry. It's easier to write. It's easier to read. It's easier to iterate on. And one of the other great advantages is kind of the live rendering. So I think starting in last year's Xcode, there was the ability to basically preview live whatever changes you're making in SwiftUI, which means you don't have to take the time to launch a simulator and then, oh, this is off a little bit, then go back to the code, make adjustment in code, go back to the simulator. You lose a lot of time doing that. So the ability to just see what you're doing live is a gigantic advantage, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what kind of evil hacks had to be put in place for Swift, because, you know, Swift is not a particularly fast compiled language, right? Sometimes it takes a little while to compile, but they've managed to make it so you can literally type, you know, hello, and it appears hello as you type. It is remarkable. And I think someone said it was like line by line swizzling of Swift to replace that one line with a new line of Swift. I think that's what they said. If that's the case, it's quite remarkable.
Yeah. And I think another advantage, right, is speed, right? Because technically, because SwiftUI is basically rendering like the view you see is a function of state, as you're typing, it's re-rendering the views at that speed. And instead of just modifying a view, which is what you do with like UIKit, you have this object and you change a property on it. It's actually rendering an entirely new view, and does it so like blazing fast.
Yeah, again, one of the choices they made was to say, listen, let's ditch classes and adopt structs.
Right.
And you know, often your structs, your view structs, have no stored properties. So they're literally zero size in memory. It just calls the body as a function call effectively and shows data from it. So it's super lightweight. And you know, we wouldn't think twice about making 1,000 integers. So why think twice making 1,000 views? There's no difference in terms of the view hierarchy. It's remarkable what they've done.
Yeah, it's really incredible. It's a lot of fun also. I think that's an aspect that's often discounted. For me personally, I like having immediate feedback, and it's just a pleasurable experience to make changes, see them, iterate on them, and to be able to do that beyond one view. You can do entire navigation stacks. So basically, you can pretty much run an app without ever running the app. It's pretty fantastic.
Folks, honestly, I that answer deserves an underline underneath it because SwiftUI is so much fun to work with. I mean, most of us think coding's fun, right? Most of the time because it is quite fun. It's a very easy job compared to many of the jobs you could have in the world. But SwiftUI, like, sparks fly out of your ears. Like, this is just, I can just noodle around and try things and make things, and it is genuinely like you're learning coding again because it's so much fun to build and go, wow, I made that in 3 lines of code or 10 lines of code, and it's remarkable, and it just brings back a lot of joy to programming again. And I don't know,
Absolutely.
Ish, what it feels like to you if you do SwiftUI for a little while and then go back to UIKit. It feels to me like, whoa, Vue did load? What's this?
Yeah, it feels a lot like going back to Objective-C after using Swift for a while. You're like, wow, that was a lot. Particularly this. So eventually it got to the point where I'm comfortable with auto layout. It still, has some sharp edges here and there, but I'm with it. But why would you? It also, another thing that SwiftUI solves is that debate: should UI be written in code because we're coders, or should SwiftUI be, or should UI be written rather in like interface builder or storyboard because you want to see like a visual representation? Which one is the way to go? SwiftUI solves that because it's the same bit. So the code translates directly to the live preview, and then from the live preview, you can make modifications in Xcode that will directly impact what the code is saying. So it's one to one, and there's no longer that debate. I like that too. It's like just one direction to go. It's like a single source of truth.
It has solved the debate by removing interface builder, basically, is what's happened here.
Basically, that's it. Yeah, which I'm a fan of, and not having to think about constraints. I love, honestly, not having to manage constraints. It's nice. Yeah.
You know, I'm not going to say I liked using constraints, using auto layout. You know, you'd regularly fight with it. You'd occasionally go, how the heck do I make this layout? And the same is true of SwiftUI. You know, not all SwiftUI layouts are just magically in your head straight away. You've got to think some
Sure.
through very, very carefully. And that's always going to be the case. You've got advanced layouts and different kinds of screen sizes and yada, yada, yada. But auto layout was complicated to write programmatically. You could write a lot of lines of code to get your layout. And that's just for a
Right.
simple, here's the layout I want. Never mind, here's one optional layout for iPad and one for iPhone, or here's different layout priorities and similar. It took quite a lot of work. And you're right, the debate was weird. The debate was storyboard versus code. Like, oh yeah, only noobs write their stuff in storyboards. Well, no, I've met many lead and principal developers at Apple who use storyboards extensively, and they are
Sure.
not by any means noobs. So
Yeah.
it's always a weird debate, right?
I thought it was, and I really thought there was like, of course, there's a strength in learning both. I'm a very visual person, so I like to see what I'm doing, kind of in real time. And if there's a really complicated layout in code, particularly when you have varying states, right? So depending on like the size class, the interface layout differently. After a while, it becomes very difficult to, in your brain, process code, which is why we have computers, honestly, to do these things for us. So it's great that with SwiftUI, you can just kind of let the computer be the computer and do those sorts of things. But even without that, just reading the layout, it's a lot easier to read, right? It's a
Yeah,
lot easier to
correct.
understand, even if you have no experience with, even with coding, you can just kind of understand in like plain language. Okay, this is the order in which things are appearing. I kind of see what's going on here. So,
Yeah.
um,
And that's,
yeah,
to be
it's pretty
fair,
great.
that's the reason I use storyboards personally for a lot of my code, my layouts, because I had complicated layouts, you know, with
Right.
lots of things going on, and I couldn't visualize that in my head adequately without having literally the drawing in front of me, seeing what it was doing. I remember I made one app for iPhone and iPad and tvOS with the same storyboard all the way through, and it had
Hmm.
all sorts of complicated rules in there to get aspect ratio and width and height and fixed. Da, da, da. but it ended up working flawlessly in all these platforms, including split screen, slide over, yada, yada, yada. It all worked great. And that took a lot of effort, a lot of constraints down the line, various priorities to make it work. But I got there. That being said, I am glad if I never have to write another line of auto layout in my life, because it is complicated. So if you were to start a new project, you know, tomorrow it's Monday morning, you think, Ish, I've got this brilliant new indie app idea, it's gonna make me a millionaire overnight, and you think I'm gonna make this in either SwiftUI or UIKit. Which would you choose and why?
I would start with SwiftUI. And the reason is, my philosophy of code in general is that it's ephemeral. It's only here for a little bit, and it's basically here until you can write something better. And the code I write today is for me 3 years down the line, when I'm assuming I am not as well rested and have less time and just worry all around. So I want to write things now that'll be easy for future me to modify and not have to do as much work with. And you basically just kind of, I don't know, you have to read the tea leaves a little bit on where things are going. But I cannot see Apple abandoning SwiftUI in the future, right? I think it's clearly the way that certain things will just be. We already saw that this year with the iOS 14 widgets, which can only be done in SwiftUI. It's time to really look into SwiftUI. So what I do personally is I recommend SwiftUI first, and then anywhere SwiftUI doesn't work, you kind of step back a little bit and start to integrate a little UIKit. But I would for sure, if you're going to start something, start with the future in mind, and I think the future is SwiftUI.
I think the widgets thing was massive, right? We're talking
Absolutely.
1 year after SwiftUI was introduced. It is now required for a fundamental system feature, a feature that users are going to ask for. If your app even vaguely makes sense as a widget, they're going to say, please give us a widget. I want a widget for your app, please. And you haven't got a choice. It's SwiftUI or nothing for that one.
Yep. And widgets became instantly popular. I think it's one of the few features that was like, here's a new feature that the general community, not just the tech folks, but the general community, just by having an iPhone, they're like, yeah, I'm using this brand new feature, right? Something that's like a system level thing a bit.
And to be fair, Apple do this a fair amount. They introduce, big features and say this is going to be huge, and then often it just kind of just peters out a little bit. Like iBeacons
stickers.
Stickers, yeah. I think iMessage apps, they've kind of done okay. iBeacons kind of okay. Never really hit the big time.
For sure.
Widgets, day one, massive. Week one, immense, huge, and the numbers are through the roof for some of these applications, which is fantastic. Yeah. So the nice thing is SwiftUI is so finely grained. You can almost take your current layout, your current data model, the current thing you're using, and say, that is my widget.
And honestly, yeah, if you're doing a good job with it, that's the beauty of it, is that it's transposable like that. So basically, your model is separate. Hopefully you can put that in a Swift package sometimes. I wrote this blog piece on putting core data in Swift Package Manager for the express purpose of, if you are making a widget that relies on core data, you're going to want to have that in a package, just to kind of abstract it. And you can basically use the same UI elements because your UI is kind of responsive to the size. For these particular sizes, you just adapt it so that it works for the widgets, and it's pretty neat.
Yeah, so I actually ran a survey on Twitter asking folks this question: if you were to start your next app, and what would it be, UIKit or SwiftUI? And the answer was 2/3 said SwiftUI. Now that I said there, side project. So I was, not necessarily a client project or a big enterprise project, even though I know I've had some very, very large companies email me saying, yeah, we're using SwiftUI now, it's fantastic, which is great. But I know for sure that, a bit more reticent if it's for client work, because any bugs you face, you have to try and battle those on your time, on your bill, rather than the client's bill, which isn't so much fun.
Yeah.
But for side projects, for personal projects, it seems to be right now a massive SwiftUI move, and it's only been September 2019 it shipped as GM, right? So we're talking 15, 16 months or something. It's remarkable,
It's
the
a
speed.
really fast adoption rate, but you save so much time once you understand SwiftUI. It saves so much time that it's almost worth the time to do any of the debugging. Some things I wrote were like 95% faster. Things that would take like a week of work to do before, I could do in like an hour. And that's
Yeah.
amazing. It's a really big leap. And another reason that it's good for future projects is you look at things like bringing things to the Mac. That it's just going to make your life a whole lot simpler, not to have to rewrite your UI code. There was Catalyst kind of, but that ended up being short-lived. I thought that was one of the most interesting things about WWDC of 2019. The big thing going in, everyone was talking Marzipan, Marzipan, Marzipan. We're going to be able to bring iOS apps to the Mac. Then Catalyst was introduced, but SwiftUI was introduced also.
Yeah.
And the Catalyst bit basically calmed down completely. Everyone was focused on SwiftUI because it was so amazing. The demonstration that Josh gave, showing just like how quickly he could basically just build an app that had like an AR component and all these things, just like on the fly. You're just like, holy wow, that's amazing. That's everything I've been looking for, because so much time is spent kind of building UI and troubleshooting UI, and a lot of that just kind of vanished, and it was great.
I felt bad for many of the other teams who launched. I mean, iOS 13 was a big year. You know, conversational collection views launched, SF symbols launched, Catalyst, dark mode, da 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 da. It was a massive year by any standards. But pretty much the only thing people were talking about was SwiftUI. And even though it was only a fairly small SwiftUI back then, it was the initial sort of, you know, launch release. It was a fairly, so there was no collection views kind of thing. You know, it's a small release. It still just dominated discussion because it was such a big revolution for all of us.
Absolutely. And I did feel particularly bad for the folks who worked on like collection views. Collection views got such a dramatic update, right?
Yeah.
Compositional layout is huge. Using different data sources, huge. All the stuff with combined, which actually kind of makes kind of in the background kind of makes SwiftUI possible in a lot of ways. Didn't get the same amount of attention, but it's still major, huge stuff. I think particularly in the collection view realm, which solved like so many prior collection view problems.
I would never write an old style collection view ever again in my life. Never again. Steve Breen, the chap who wrote that code, did amazing work, and I'm so grateful to him. But there's a huge amount of love in the chat here for SF symbols, and you know, I realized recently I'm using it all the time. In every app I write, I'm using SF symbols. It's huge.
SF symbols is a welcome addition. I saw someone using SF symbols in their code comments. I was like, oh, that's interesting. But yeah. SF symbols in general, I'm a huge fan of. Last year was great. This year is even better. Hey, puppies! Particularly with like the multicolored ones, I think it's really just fantastic. Yeah, it's cool.
Well, you know, you mentioned already that SwiftUI opens up the possibility of going to macOS, but also so well trained. Also, tvOS, also watchOS. If you want to go in that direction. It's now possible. Doesn't mean everyone's doing it, but it's now possible. Has it encouraged you to think about macOS or tvOS or watchOS or something else? Or are you still thinking iOS?
I'm for sure thinking macOS. I've always thought about macOS and just thought it was a gigantic hill to climb. So now I'm thinking more about macOS. watchOS has changed a lot over time, but what I've realized is that for the kind of apps that I normally write, which is like a like productivity style apps, the watch just isn't the right place for a dedicated app per se. I would think more about like widgets and things like that. And then tvOS I love tvOS, but it's really content driven. Like if you don't have content,
it really is.
Do you really belong on tvOS? And for the stuff I do, it's not content. But if you're doing any like fitness things like that, I think that both of those platforms, both the watch and the TV, clearly with Fitness Plus, it's a great place for it. The beauty is that if you down the road change your mind, you already have your toolkit there. You already have the UI built out, and it's ready to go on all these platforms and feel native, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and I'm not sure folks necessarily realize how SwiftUI's semantic approach to stuff actually makes it very easy to adapt your UI automatically to other platforms. For example, when you have like a tab view on iOS, you get a tab bar controller towards the bottom. On macOS, it becomes a flipped sort of tab group box that you might have in some of the settings applications. On watchOS, it's a paging view with dots you swipe between left and right. And on tvOS, it is a segmented control top, like the Movies app has, for example. And it's the same tab view. Same tab view does all four of those things automatically, because you aren't saying, I want a UI tab bar controller doing this exact thing. It just adapts itself automatically to fit the right thing for the platform, it works so well. And I think with macOS particularly, now that Big Sur has actually a very nice UI theme kind of out of the box. Now, the default macOS split screen primary detail application, where it has the sort of the slightly translucent frosted sidebar going all the way to the top kind of thing, it looks good out of the box. And macOS has struggled with that for quite a while. Have good looking apps out of the box. It hasn't done a good job with that, but now it does. And I'm hoping, I really hope, that means we're going to see an explosion in macOS applications, because SwiftUI does make it so easy, I think.
For sure. I think that's going to happen for two reasons. One is, as you're mentioning, SwiftUI is doing a good job, right? Just out of the box doing that. The other is the M1s being able to run native code for iOS.
Yeah.
I think the combination of these things are going to make a lot more applications work well and look great on the Mac. Yeah.
I certainly think Big Sur has made Catalyst apps look better. They look more like native macOS apps now, as opposed to UIKit apps sort of living uncomfortably in a macOS world.
Well, here's what I will admit. I was not using the Catalyst app so much before Big Sur. So when Big Sur came along, then I kind of hopped on board. Yeah.
Well, certainly Apple are backing, aren't they? Because, was it News, Home, Stocks? They're all written in Catalyst, right?
For sure. It's like all the apps that you really don't use that much on the Mac is where we're going for. Because the Home app, how often do you use Home on the Mac? There's I think it was the Voice Notes app was there. It just wasn't a lot. But now it's better. Particularly, my favorite newcomer is the Messages app, because now I can use the message effects, which has always been one of my things, because I like fun and I like to like slam down messages or like shoot off fireworks, lasers.
And now you can.
All that, and now I can. So that brings me joy.
Catalyst, if nothing else, Catalyst means you can do fireworks in your iMessage, and that's the main thing.
that was a major draw for me. Yeah.
So last year, back when conferences were still possible in person, you went to Paris and gave a talk about integrating UIKit and SwiftUI in the same application. And what do you think is the best way to do that, to bring these two very different frameworks together? Do you kind of keep a library of components you've pre-made? Do you kind of approach from SwiftUI and bring UIKit in as you need, or start with UIKit and bring SwiftUI in as you need? Do you try and think about AppKit at the same time, or is it some other way?
So what I normally do, like I said, I try to do SwiftUI first. I start off doing SwiftUI for views, and then UIKit for navigation. And then anything that didn't really conform well to SwiftUI. For example, at the time I gave the talk, collection views didn't exist yet. So I needed a collection view, like, all right, so now I have just a wrapper that I have. And I was making something on my own called SwiftUI Kit. That's my framework that I'm just like tossing in all the things that are the combination, basically the representable views of like UIKit wrapped in SwiftUI. Another beauty of that is of SwiftUI. Even if you don't feel like SwiftUI is ready for production, it's a good idea to bring some SwiftUI into your project because you can still do that live rendering. You can just wrap the UIKit in SwiftUI, which is something I mentioned in the talk, and then you can just like view your UIKit in Xcode without having to launch the simulator, which is neat.
So you get some of the benefits of SwiftUI while still using UIKit.
Absolutely, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Siberia says, navigation in SwiftUI made me cry.
It's a completely different way of thinking. It took me a while to even understand what's going on because I've been doing the UIKit navigation for so long. I was very, very confused about what SwiftUI was even attempting to do. Now I'm more on board. I still would like a little bit more laziness to it, an option for laziness, because sometimes having your entire view hierarchy render at once can be a bit much. But yeah, that's the other bit about it. Something that I learned the hard way is it's really important to think about how things will be rendered. For example, SwiftUI renders very quickly, like we mentioned. UIKit does not. What you do not want to do is put yourself in a situation where your UIKit views are re-rendering at trying to do that at 60 frames a second, because UIKit was not meant to reinstantiate like that frequently. I ran into the issue. I had a collection view on the same page as a text field, and every time I typed a letter, it would redraw the collection view.
Yeah.
And I was like, why is this performance so garbage? Because that's not meant to happen. So you have to be careful about where you place your UIKit integration.
I think because UIKit, thanks to Objective-C, is based entirely around the idea of classes. And so your UI view comes from, UI responder comes from yada, yada, yada. And, when you have a UI stack view or whatever, it gets all these properties and methods that just come with it. Whether or not, for the longest time, you could set a background color on a stack view and it wouldn't do anything. It's a non-rendering view. They changed that, I think, in iOS 13 or 14.
Until this year.
Yeah, there you go. Then... but it would do nothing at all because it wasn't designed to do that. But it still had this property and the methods memory being allocated to it across the board for all its parent classes. And it was expensive. And that's entirely gone away because it's all now simple, plain structs.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's a thing you really have to kind of look out for in understanding the differences between structs and classes, and not being mindful of not just injecting a class into a struct without understanding kind of what that might lead to. Which is usually
sorry, go ahead.
I think what it might lead to, which is usually like latency. You end up with like some choppy behavior at that point.
Yeah, I certainly think that SwiftUI is one of those things that brilliantly determines the difference between easy and simple. It's very easy to make SwiftUI applications, but none of it is simple. Understanding the structs and classes thing alone is, time consuming. But then property wrappers happening there, computed properties happening. There's a lot of work happening there mentally.
Understanding what's happening there. Yeah, all that. Yep.
Yeah.
There ends up being a lot behind it. It hides a lot of stuff for you, but if you just dive in, you get to see, whoa, there's a lot going on there. Which is why, for a while, I was really hoping that we would get like, Swift is open source. Why not open source SwiftUI? Then we kind of see how they're doing things like the tab view to see how. But I realized there's probably a lot there that we may never get to period on. For instance, like forms. I'd really like to understand what forms are doing, because forms change a lot of formatting. We use the form view, right? It rounds the corners of the list. It provides a little padding. It changes like the font style for the section headers. There's a lot of additional stuff that you don't see. All you see is form.
Plus, of course, the push and pop behavior of pickers that had the crowd go wild at Dub.
Yeah.
It's great out of the box, right? Or buttons change to be an inline table row instead. It's just, it's exactly what I want. Good job. Joseph Heck says he hopes he sees focusable views exposed more in SwiftUI, i.e. in Watch and tvOS. And I'm guessing here he means the ability to add focus to views and take it away again, which particularly right now is problematic. You want to say, hey, resign first responder, and there is still now no way of doing resign first responder. We're kind of waiting for dub 21 maybe to get something like that in iOS.
I certainly hope so, because right now, unfortunately, many times I have to wrap a UI text field, because just from user experience, if you are on a page and there's just like a single, basically say like you want to like log in, right? Put in like a username. You don't want to have the user tap to put in the credentials, because what else would they do? That's why they're there, to put in the credentials. You want to have the focus already there, and then when that's done, they hit return. You then want to move the focus to the password field. And currently with SwiftUI, that's just not a thing, and it's unfortunate.
It's unfortunate, but I think I can imagine being someone who's got some important client work, and the client's work just just dismiss the keyboard now, and like, oh, that's surprisingly hard to do. And it seems like it ought not to be. It's actually be a simple thing to do, but it is weirdly surprisingly hard to do in SwiftUI.
Absolutely, and as such, at that point, it's just easier to just use the UIKit version of it, which I really don't want to do, but it's just so much simpler at this point to go that route. So yeah. I for sure that's like at the very top of my list for this year. Last year it was really near the top. Last year the top was text views, because there was no multi-line text, right? And the collection view, there's no grid. Multi-line text, I'm like, how do you not have multi-line text? Now we have multi-line text, but cannot automatically gain focus easily. So I should have been more specific in my wish. Like the Twilight.
So demanding, Ish. You're never happy with what you've got.
This is true. I'm never happy, but yeah, that would make me a lot happier. Although the calendar picker made me pretty happy. We have had a really crappy calendar picker for a very, very long time, and to be able to actually see like the grid calendar, I thought was great. Although I hear not everyone loves the new like time picker. I think it's fine, but a lot of folks don't like it.
Change-ish, that's what it is. No one likes change. Who moved my cheese?
Right?
But it's interesting, because I think we're seeing these things because of the increased iOS macOS integration. They didn't wait 14 years to introduce a color picker just for fun. They added it only because you had to have one to fit into the macOS ecosystem, to have a color picker. It's basically required on macOS. And so now we've finally got a color picker. So maybe macOS plus iOS should have happened sooner.
Yeah. I also like that it's going everywhere at the same time, right? So for instance, we got like pop-up reviews on iPad, but we couldn't use pop-up reviews on iPhone for quite a while. Remember that? Yeah. It was like exclusively, you get this thing, but you only get it like in this one area. I'm glad
you say you got to use it.
Going like across the board now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let's talk about your indie app work, because you've made a number of indie apps in your time. In fact, what you featured on a movie? You were?
I was in a movie. I was a little bit, yeah.
You're a movie star, is what you're saying.
Story. not at all. I starred in a movie, which is different than being a movie star. It was called App the Human Story. It's a documentary following the story of a few developers doing a kind of like different aspects of the indie life, and it kind of goes through my story of kind of probably like midway through my career as an independent developer.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you must every day in your wherever you are in your flat behind your apartment, you must every day have stacks of grade A, AAA, app indie ideas come to your head, and any one of those could be a massive hit, right? We never know what's going to take off in the world. What process do you do when you have an app come to your head? You think, no, that's a terrible idea. That's a good one. How do you try and whittle down which ones you actually want to invest the time in to make a little prototype, perhaps, or even a full application out of it?
I kind of go a lot by how excited I am about the idea, like which one is like kind of really like driving me, and then I also again think about the future. Will future-ish in 3 to 5 years really still want this? If it's just for like right now, do I really want to bring this into the world and then support it for years to come? That's like one of the big ones. There's that, and also a little bit of, I'm really huge on just like scratch my own itch. I'm going to make this app because it's something that I want. But does any other human want this, or is it just something that's just for me? Sometimes if it's just for me, I can just like cobble something together and not worry too much about design. I work with a designer in Australia. Her name is Heidi. I'm like, do I even need
She's
to bring
here. She's
Heidi
here
into this?
today. You can wave, Heidi. Hi, Heidi.
Oh, hello, Heidi. Yeah. Or do I just like throw something together and kind of work on it? Sometimes it'll start as something small that's just for me, and then later on become something more useful to everyone else.
So I think there are two key points you made there, and both are worth dwelling on slightly longer. One is, yes, absolutely scratch your own itch. Make the app
Yes,
that solves your problem, because there are over 1 billion iOS users in the world, right?
for sure.
Unless you are that sole, beautiful, and unique snowflake, which is everyone's completely unlike you. You've made an app to dress your pet iguanas. I don't know how obscure your app might be, but unless you've made a really, really thoroughly obscure app idea, there'll be 10,000, 100,000, maybe even a million people out there. That's only one
For
in a
sure.
thousand of all users,
Absolutely.
who will think, I had the same itch. I want
Yeah.
that same scratch, that same app on my phone. And in fact, I've said before, the most popular app I've made was an app to scratch my own itch. I made it just for me, and it was an app to study Latin on the move, to
Oh,
read Latin, because I studied Latin at university, to read Latin and have like Latin dictionary on the move. It was made just for me, and it's paid my mortgage and more for the last decade, which is
that's
great.
amazing.
It was
That's
just for
really
me.
awesome.
I never even thought that anyone else would want it, and then suddenly schools started buying it, and universities started buying it for their students, which is
That's
great.
it.
So that's the first thing: is scratch your own
Mhm.
itch. Absolutely brilliant rule there. But the second thing is think about future Ish, although not obviously for him. Think about yourself.
Oh, please think about me. Think about me. Yeah.
What would future Ish
Also
think of this
yourself.
application? Think about your future self. Do you want to be maintaining this thing in 3 years? Because your killer app idea could be brilliant. Scratch your itch, brilliant. But
Mhm.
do you want to commit to making sure that carries on working for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? Because folks, even today, still expect their apps to work for a long time. They've paid $1 for it. That's at least 7, 8 years of support right there in their
Minimum.
heads. And so, are you happy to commit to that? Are you happy to stick to that and stay with it and make it work
Right.
for the future? And that's a big commitment.
For sure. And that's again kind of ties to scratching your own itch, right? This is going to be something if you're going to be with for a while. You'll have like ups and downs. In the down times, you want to like still love it enough to still want to take care of it. If it's an app about something you have no interest in, like zero interest in, you're going to make yourself completely miserable. You're like, I hate this thing. I don't understand what it does, which also makes it difficult to make a good experience with a customer because like I don't really get it. I don't really know it. If you don't really get it yourself, it's going to be really difficult to make a satisfying experience for someone else. You have to have a little bit of investment, hopefully a lot of investment into what you're building, or I would just build something else. I think another thing, not really related to this, but in general, I think that sometimes folks are afraid that they don't have a unique enough idea. And I think that the reality is unique ideas are fun, but not as valuable as people think. Right? The idea really isn't the thing. It's really the execution. If you look at about it, if you think about it in like other fields, like think about the movies that have completely unique storylines. The storyline has never been told before. There'd be very few movies, honestly, very few books like this. Most stories are stories that have been told, but they're told like in a new way. And honestly, one of my most popular apps, which is a simple to-do list app. And at the time, there was already several thousand, maybe tens of thousands of to-do list apps in the store because everyone has one, right? But honestly, it's one of my favorite genres of apps because there's always room for a unique spin and your own unique way of looking at it. Does not mean it's going to be the number one to-do list app in the store, but there could very well be something that you need for yourself that is just not widely available, not widely done, or also maybe not using the latest and greatest thing. Every year, Apple introduces new things. And not everyone that already exists is going to implement this new thing. You may make a to-do list app that only or has a feature where it just like makes brilliant use of app clips. How many apps are doing that? not that many. So there's always room to have something new based on the new thing that Apple presents.
Absolutely, and Apple feature it too. You know, they want to promote
That's the other
widgets.
thing.
They want to
Yeah,
promote app clips. They want to promote the new stuff and say, look at this cool new
absolutely.
iOS stuff your phone now does free of charge. These apps are showcasing it, and hopefully, if you're
Yeah,
there on day one, you can make some good money.
for sure. Yep.
So when you are building your app, you've done your best, pick your best possible idea, you've got it out there, and you're quite pleased with it. That's only the first step, right? Because then you've got to actually succeed somehow.
Yeah. You
Because there
barely
are
started.
exactly you've done the first 90%. Now it's time for the second 90%, right? Actually
Hmm.
making it succeed somehow, because it's very, very easy, even with good quality apps, to just sink into oblivion on the App Store, because there's so many apps on there, and
There's millions.
a lot of dross. A lot are just the same app cloned 1,000
Hmm.
times variations, and Apple are doing their best to curtail those, but they still exist. But how you can break through that noise and get App Store is hard. But that's a big thing of being an indie app, right? Because doesn't matter how good your app is, if no one finds it, you've got zero sales. So
Yeah.
as an indie developer who has done well, what are your
Hmm.
tips for getting success on the App Store?
I think one of the biggest ones is to engage in the community. I think it's really important. For example, what some people will do is not even think about marketing the app or telling anyone about the app until the app is done, completed in the store, and think, "Hey, I just shipped my app." Okay, who are you? What's your story? What's your app? This is the first time anyone's heard of you or your app. You've made like no connections. We don't really know much about your app. There's not a lot going on. So what's helpful, I think, is to basically be involved in um, both the iOS community and the community that your app is suited towards.
Hmm.
For a couple reasons. One is you get good feedback to make sure there's actually, scratching their itch as well, that there's features that they want. And the other one is that so when you tell people about your app, they can tell other people. I really find that authentic relationship is the best way to kind of sell something. Like, hey, I make this thing. You have a problem. My thing solves your problem. So you're not really selling the product. You're really just selling a solution. Like, hey, here's a solution. Folks are happy to get a solution. Like, what? A solution? I've been wanting a solution. And then they have friends who also need a solution, and then it kind of goes like that too.
Yeah.
Another thing that's really helpful is that Apple now has a form you can fill out if you would like to be featured. So you can say, hey, here's what I've done. Here's some screenshots. Here's why I think this app is great. And if they agree, they may feature you on the store. And that gets you kind of like a little bit more momentum with that. So
Certainly engaging with folks it is just huge, right? Because not only are you building word of mouth marketing, but you're also, I hope, getting feedback. Because
for sure.
you said earlier, it's really important to pick an app that's a topic you care about. Otherwise, you'll find it very hard to work on, or you'll miss key features. And this is your chance to slightly correct that. If you are less than aware of all the varieties of things out there, you can talk to folks. And actually, of course, Apple was bitten by this when they launched Health. This was a few years ago now. They launched Health. The one-stop shop to track all your body health. It'd be amazing. But there's no period tracking. Okay, that's half the world you missed out there, Apple. Good job. How many women were on the coding team for that one? How many women did you talk to? And of course, they're all top secret because it's Apple, so they probably talk to hardly anybody. So it's a problem for everyone. Go out there and say, here's my idea. What do you think?
Absolutely. It helps to make a better product in general, right? Even though you're independent, there's a community, there's like a team who's kind of rooting for you, right? They really want your thing to be great.
Yeah.
So it kind of helps to do that. There's another side of that, though. You do have to find the identity of what your app is after taking all the feedback. You really cannot make something that satisfies every single person, because if you try to satisfy everyone, you will satisfy no one. It's really, once you get all the feedback, kind of figuring out, okay, here is kind of what we want this app to be, and here are the ideas that will help make that better along this direction. If you try to do like everything, you could end up doing nothing.
Yeah. So again, just scratch that itch you've got, get it out there, and see what the response is, I think. And it might be
Yeah,
early sort of tester feedback, but also early customer reviews, because I know negative reviews suck. No one wants negative reviews. But if someone's taking the time to stop and tell you what they think's wrong with your app, that's kind of helpful, you know?
correct.
And it gives you a chance to improve and iterate. And you can actually blank old reviews when you release a new version if you want to,
Hmm.
if you need to do that. But it gives you a chance to say, okay, that's a good idea. I could do that better. And as a rule of 2 or 3, where if the same person, the same feedback's being given to you by 3 different people, you should probably think, okay, that's maybe 10,000 people thinking the same thing and then not saying it. So
For sure.
that feedback is just really, really important.
The one exception to that I would say is, why isn't this app free? Ignore that.
Yeah,
That no.
yeah,
Tens of thousands of people are thinking that, but no.
yeah. So with my Latin app, every time someone complains about the price, I put up a buck. because,
Oh, right.
because honestly,
Yeah.
it's an extremely obscure area. You either want it or you don't want it. And if you're willing to, pay for it, you'll pay whatever the cost is, quite frank, because you want this
Yeah.
functionality. You'll have this thing. You will pay for it no matter what. And it helps that lots of schools buy it, 100 at a time rather than 1 or 2. They just buy it in bulk for the whole year group, which is quite nice. But yeah, the free thing, no matter what you do, no matter what price you choose or how cheap it make it, people always say, I wish it was just some bit cheaper, just a little bit cheaper, a little bit cheaper, a little bit cheaper, and then it's free and you're making nothing at all.
Yeah, exactly. And then, yeah. I've also noticed that with free apps, you actually get worse reviews. Because with a free app, a person
Yes.
has no investment, and pretty much anyone can comment on it. They don't have to use the app. Just like, I'm just, I'm
Correct.
just here to troll.
Pretty much, yeah, fair enough. Now, you mentioned filling in a form to get featured by Apple, which you can do, folks, and I recommend it.
Mhm.
Does it matter, though? I mean, does getting featured by Apple on the App Store make a big difference? And if so, what are your tips for making it actually happen, other than filling in the form, of course?
It improves your dopamine quite a bit. Just that feeling of like, hey, look at this thing I did. Just like take a bunch of screenshots of your thing. It feels great. Does it make a difference income-wise? While it's featured, it does. Over the long term, it does not. So your goal shouldn't only be to be featured. Being featured is nice and great and fantastic, and I highly recommend it. I hope that everyone gets to experience that at some point, because it does feel really good. But it's really kind of like a long-term thing. You get like a little bonus, like a little bump, right? If you think about like a video game like Mario, it's like getting the star for a little bit. You're like, yeah, I got this star. I'm awesome. I'm amazing for this little bit, and then it wears off, and you go back down to where you are. What it can do though is bring awareness about your app, right? As you're featured, you can't depend on it solely for marketing, because that's something Apple actually asks you. Okay, so how are you marketing this? What they don't want to hear is, you're going to do it for me, because that's not going to be like a successful long-term thing, because it's only featured for a limited amount of time, and then after that, it's done. So you should have some other way of kind of communicating about your app. But I recommend it. I wouldn't say avoid being featured. I would do it. Be featured.
So they featured my app as App of the Day in the UK like a few days ago, actually. And
Congratulations.
it's like, yeah, it's great, brilliant, hooray! It's a free app. With no in-app purchases, like, yeah, I'm not going to retire on that one.
I that's one of the reasons I learned about the free apps, right? Because I did that and I got a gigantic feature, like huge. So what I got was a tremendous increase in support requests.
Yeah.
With no additional income. And I was like, whoa, that's interesting. I have all these feature requests now, I have like all this additional work to do. It was basically like almost like an expanded beta almost, because everyone's like, hey, I have all this feedback, all this information, I'm not replying to things. So I have a thing I try to reply to every email, and that just became like a massive undertaking in time with no additional income. So I think it's always good to charge just a little bit, because it takes time to create a product. It takes a little bit of money even to be on the store as a developer. So you just need to balance that out. I'm not necessarily advocating for becoming like a zillionaire off of it, but I think breaking even is probably a good thing. You don't want to come to the point you're like, wow, this is really costing me a ton of money to be an indie app developer. I'm just losing. Kind of, I think breaking even is at least fair.
Yeah, as you say, if you get featured and it makes your life worse, things have gone wrong somewhere. You don't know.
Something to look out for. Like, is this even what I wanted? Yeah.
Yeah, I remember it took them a while to because what I can tell folks the actual process here because we've both been featured now. We know what the process is. You know, you get an email saying your app might be featured in the App Store. You're like, oh wow, you know, it's might. Don't rely on it. Might be featured. Prepare yourself. And you then go to the App Store Connect. It tells you what you have to submit, and it depends what they ask for. But there's many different things they request. It could be like a wide bar, a small thing, whatever. Various different sizes they request. But the most complex one is the App of the Day one, I think, because they want a picture that works at 3 very different sizes, the same picture, over which they can overlay the text App of the Day plus download plus your app's title. And getting a good picture that's kind of catchy and interesting, you know, reflects your app, but is not your app because they want original artwork made by you or someone else that works at 3 sizes and can be overlaid over it. It's quite hard, and I was asked last year to be featured. I filled it in, did all the work. I commissioned some original artwork, everything, sent it off. They were back saying, "Can you change this?" Okay, fine, I'll change it and put it back again. Bounced back and forward a few times, and then it went silent. And then I think 6 months later, they went back again saying, "We'd like to feature up in the App Store." I actually emailed them saying, I'm sorry, I just don't have the time for this. It's a free app. I'm making no money. I burned through 30 or 40 hours of work, commissioning, designing, editing, and got nothing for it. It's not worth my time. And then I featured it again this year. So playing hardball almost may have worked out for me quite well.
That's funny. That's an interesting story. And yeah, I think another reason that developers should just kind of be aware. Also, be ready. Plan your stuff a bit. I don't know if that's publicly available what they ask for, but I'm sure you can find it in a blog somewhere, like the artwork sizes and things like that, just to kind of like have an idea. Because the first time it happens, you can get caught really off guard. You're like, oh no, I have to make art, and that's not even what I do. So it's helpful. Luckily, I already knew Heidi when that happened, so it was like, hey, Heidi, let's work on a thing. But yeah, it can be a lot.
It can, but yes, fortunately you've got an excellent designer on hand to help you out and make that big difference, because it is hard, because they give you an example artwork and it's sort of it's a weird sort of abstract people thing playing some sort of sport, I think it was the one I had, and they obviously want original new artwork designed, and that takes, who knew, skill and talent and actual work, you know, who knew? And so it's
design your app, you probably never thought of original artwork. You're like, I was just kind of trying to get the app to like work and get it on the store and
to not crash and be terrible.
Basically, original artwork. I don't even. So it's interesting skill for any designers listening. By the way, I think that would be an interesting thing to offer as a service. Be like, hey, I help developers make original artwork. There will be lots of developers who have this thing and have no idea how to do that. So I think that's a good avenue.
So we've talked about getting featured and you know, doing your best to get on the App Store and do well. But what else do you think Apple could change about the way they run the App Store itself to make it better for indie developers? And that might mean more profitable, might also mean easier to work with.
Yeah. I can think of a thing that would make it worse. I hope they don't do. So what happened for Apple Arcade for games, I can accept that in the game arena. What I hope never happens, though, is just a one-time subscription for the entire App Store, because I think that would crush and just basically kill indie development. Because at that point, the revenue would likely be based on time spent in the app.
Exactly.
That becomes really difficult as you being an independent developer. And depending on the kind of app you're making, your goal could likely be for folks to spend very little time in the app. So for productivity apps, I actually don't want folks spending a ton of time. In fact, you have a widget so they don't have to necessarily even go to the app. So then how would you ever get compensated from that? That would be a horrible thing. I think in general, though, there's not enough effort on the side of the App Store to keep it clean and tidy. There is an effort, and I appreciate all the folks who are doing like app review and such, but I think there's a set of rules that isn't evenly applied, and oftentimes some confusion on what's allowed and what's not. For example, when David Smith released Widgetsmith, which is a fantastic app, um, that really changed the landscape of many iPhones over this past season. There was basically a copycat app that got higher SEO rank in the App Store that was clearly like a scam. It's clearly a scam app. It's clearly not the same. And because his app was so huge, I'm like, why doesn't Apple realize that the #1 app in ranking it now has this competitor in SEO that's a complete like ripoff? I actually contacted Apple before because when stickers came out, there was someone who was just literally taking Bitmoji and making sticker apps from them. That's not Bitmoji, but just like, I'm going to take these Bitmoji. And like, oh, I have this sticker app. I have this one, sticker. I'm like, hey, Apple, look at this. And they're like, is this your copyrighted material? I'm like, no. I'm just reporting it on behalf of someone else. They're like, well, we don't really have a process for that. So I'm like, yikes, things like that. So basically, if you just keep it as a tidy area, I think that'd be nice. Something else I would like is with subscriptions. I hate the model of the free preview. Right? There's the free trial that automatically bills you if you can't remember to cancel it. I don't like that pattern. It feels like a dark pattern to me. I prefer a free trial. At the end of the trial, it just no longer works. Kind of like the way a media streaming would be, right? Like a Netflix. You use it for the trial, and then at the end of it, if you want to continue, you would have to pay in order to. Although they may do that dark pattern too. Now that I think about it, but I don't like the idea of you automatically pay. Cause maybe I'm biased because I'm getting a little bit older and forgetful. Like, oh, I forgot. I no longer. I forgot I even had that thing. I've used this thing. The phone rang. I never got back to it. I don't like that pattern. So I really appreciate it if that pattern were to change. Though I wonder how that'll go, because I'm sure it impacts the bottom line quite a bit. But I would hope that the goal would be to make the best user experience, and I think the best customer experience is if I'm trying something out, I'm just trying it out, and at the end of that, I would just like no longer be able, kind of the way screen time works, right? So if at the end of the day, if you've been on Twitter for too long, it'll like gray out the icon and be like, nope, you got to do more. That's the perfect way of handling. Like, you know what? If you want to continue using this, you got to pay. I think that's a much better way of handling it.
Okay, let's try and unpack what you said, because there's a few different things in that answer. The arcade for apps thing is interesting because there's a brilliant Apple developer, Ricky Mondello, who was on WebKit for a long time. He's now doing the authentication stuff, which is great as well. And he regularly tweets about, like, if you're going to do a web feature, like a new web standard, always think about how it can be used for evil. You know, how people would twist that to abuse it. And, you know, Arcade for Apps is a great example. If it is based on time, we would start making apps that make you want to spend more time in the app. And that would be a disaster, as you say, for many very good quality apps. They make it such a short usage. That's why we use them. And so then you get into, okay, let's make it based on app launches. And you can see that being abused to heck as well. Constant prompts to come back and launch the app, whatever. There are all sorts of weird, evil ways you can abuse that. So I hope, again, it never happens. It'd be interesting to see if they tried it, but it's so full of problems. And I think because, like, with Arcade, if someone makes a, I don't know, a FPS game, you know, you can get 10 of those, 20 of those, 30 of those, and they don't really compete. I can have Red Dead Redemption and Doom at the same time and not think one's the other. Whereas when it comes to a calendar app, I'm going to kind of want one calendar app. Maybe if I'm fussy, two if I'm lucky, you know. But, you know, you don't want multiple things. So it becomes more challenging to handle that more fairly, I think. So
for sure.
I think App Arcade won't happen, but we'll see. As for uneven rules, this is a challenging area because I think we're seeing still Apple saying, you know, running to the press doesn't work. And yet running to the press always works.
For sure.
I think nearly always they change their mind once it comes out that they were uneven or heavy-handed or unfair or whatever it happens to be. they change their mind very quickly, and and it's so easy to do now thanks to Twitter or 9to5Mac or Mac Rumors are always happy to throw up app developer angry because so and so and so wording was changed, and Apple seemed to cave in a little bit, I think.
Yeah, that is for sure been a thing, but I think also internally, I don't know that everyone's been on the same page about it. I had an app rejected once that had already been in the store. That's the other thing too. It's weird when you've been there for a while and then suddenly you're rejected for like a bug fix. It was like a bug fix update, and I got rejected because in my promo video, so on the text message on the screen said WTF, just like that, WTF, and like, we don't allow that in the store. I'm like, well, that's weird because you have 5 apps with WTF in the app icon.
Yeah.
One of them, which is literally called WTF. Why? And it's not. And WTF could mean anything, right?
Yeah, could.
Yeah.
It doesn't, but it could.
It doesn't say, but I mean, it didn't explicitly say it. It just had that abbreviation. Now, I would be okay with that rule if that rule was a consistent rule. Or if it was like a warning, like, hey, by the way, next time, you got to do this. But the app literally, I couldn't put up the bug fix because I had the video that in a text message on the screen had WTF somewhere in the bit. It's just not, I don't know.
That's frustrating.
Evenly applied rules. No matter how crazy the rules are, if they're evenly applied, people will tend to understand. Like, we don't like these rules, but the rules are evenly applied. But once it's subjective, like, well, just resubmit, it'll go through. Now we have an issue. I feel like that's something that they can work on.
So my very first app for iOS was a flashcard program. So I could do English, Greek, and Latin at the same time, like multiple languages at a point. A plus B plus C at the same time to really blow your brain. It got rejected by Apple because I used the name Flashzilla, and Flash was not allowed on the App Store. I'm like, no, it's not using Flash. It's a flashcard program. So
yeah,
that was great. Yeah,
the name Flash. You're like, wow, that's an interesting rejection. Yep.
Yeah. A few folks have said. Oh, so go ahead, Dish.
I've had a collection of the most amazing rejections. I've been rejected so many times. It's really something.
It never gets nice. It's always annoying. You're like, oh no, it took me ages to submit that app and get it all done properly, and now I'm going to tweak some screenshot on 3 different device sizes or something hideous like that. Yeah, it's grim.
Luckily, review times now are like down to a day, but when review times were like a week or more, like holy cow, like what? Yeah, it was
rage.
It was rough. Yeah.
So a great point here from Prathamesh Kawakar, who says, I just wish they gave us upgrade pricing. Now, Apple have resisted this for a long time. They've seen nothing like this, and we're seeing increasing numbers of freemium apps on the App Store or subscriptions kind of taking over as a standard because there's no reliable way to generate income otherwise. You can sell your $5 app, and then you're supporting it for years and years and years, basically for free. So I think upgrade pricing would be a lovely addition. Even now, I'd happily welcome it.
Yeah, I think upgrade pricing would be great. I'm an advocate for any model that really makes sense. That one doesn't work for many of the apps that I have, but I think if someone wanted, why not? Some of the complexities we have in subscription pricing right now, subscriptions are like insane. So you can have a subscription price, but then have like a different price if a person has a subscription, then cancels a subscription, and then comes back. You have like incentive pricing on top of that. And then there's all these different tiers and varying ways in which you can get to subscription. That is so much more complicated than upgrade pricing. I think upgrade pricing just should be an option just because. It's a shame that it's not.
So Ben Sherman actually adds to that Apple's sub receipts often don't include enough information to tell you what subs are actually being renewed. And he's right. Apple's subscription system, they make you do most of the work. And this is where companies like Revenue Cat are just dominating because they take all that pain away from you and make it easy to do subscriptions. You can focus on making a good app, not on subs and IAPs and renewals and family sharing and yada, 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 yada. There's a lot of work in there, you know?
I really hate the store kit. Again, no, I understand it's tough to work on. So if anyone's listening and you have to work on StoreKit, my apologies. But
We appreciate you, StoreKit team.
yeah, I appreciate it because it is bringing in revenue, but it's still a bit of a pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And finally, you mentioned the complexity around forgetting to cancel subscriptions because it is surprisingly easy to do. In fact, there's a whole range of like mini scandals for a while about like set your wallpaper app only $99 a month kind of thing, and they knew folks would go a 7-day trial and they basically forget to cancel it and they just scam off
Yep.
money that way. And it's not a scam. They're getting wallpapers for their thing at extremely inflated prices, but it's basically a scam, right? It is really a scam.
Still scammy because under no other
Yeah.
circumstance would you pay that much for
No.
the service. The other thing is, at the time, Apple made it very difficult to cancel subscription. It was like buried the way to do it. Now it's a lot easier. You can just go to the App Store, click your avatar, go to
Yeah.
subscription, see them, and cancel them. But at one point in time, it was almost impossible to find, and then there was no revenue. There was no refund policy for subscriptions. You can refund direct purchases, but you can't refund subscriptions. So you have people who've just paid $700 for wallpapers with no ability to get a refund, and it was just an incredibly dark pattern that
It
messed
was,
things
yeah.
up for everyone. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So it was making money in a scammy way. And, they're using all
a very
legit
scammy.
channels to make a lot of money doing basically no work. And Apple were allowing it. They were letting
They
it
were,
through.
and it was weird because sometimes they would reject other folks for how they presented their price, but there was no guide for a long time. Apple didn't say what they wanted, but they would reject you if you didn't give them what they wanted. Well, to be
Yeah.
completely honest, while there's another app that just like scamming folks these $700 wallpapers, and they're fine, they're good to go. It was just really an odd time. I'm glad that has improved. There's always work to be done, but it's improved a lot over the last few years.
Yeah. So for our last set of questions, I want to talk to you about a presentation you gave called Programming with Purpose. And was this in Boston, SwiftFest, I think?
Yeah, so it was in SwiftFest Boston in 2019. It turns out it was recorded then, but it's been trapped behind a paywall. And at the time, I was thinking I would really wish that folks could kind of hear this talk because I think it's really useful in a lot of areas in life, not just in coding. In fact, it's more like a TED talk than anything, to help to kind of it gives a little bit of my history and my background, but also it's there to kind of inspire and help folks kind of like find their purpose and kind of help them through life a bit. So what I did a couple weeks ago is I re-recorded it so that I could share it on YouTube. And I basically just went through the keynote, did voiceover, so you don't get to see my lovely face, but you hear my voice as I kind of go through this talk.
Yeah. And I've met you, I think, twice now in San Jose and then again in New York. And I learned things about you in this talk. The bow tie thing particularly stands out.
I no longer wear bow ties, but yeah, yep,
Never again will
yep,
you wear bow ties.
I'm done. Yeah,
I didn't Jobs used
dramatic.
to wear bow ties back in the sort of early Jobs days? Oh, hello. Sorry, one of my
Did
kids
he?
has wandered in. Hello. Is it bedtime? You got Yoshi? You do have Yoshi.
Oh, what's that?
Is it bedtime?
Yoshi.
You want to wave? Okay. All right. Love you. Take care. Good night. Yeah, I think Jobs late 20s, I want to say, early 30s.
Okay.
Can't quite tell. Younger Jobs. I think he wore some bow ties.
All right.
But you were there first, perhaps.
And tell you what, if I am ever the CEO of Apple, I will consider rebranding myself with a bow tie.
Hey, that's him. It's your chance.
over
we can get him back in bow ties. But in this talk, you mentioned a whole range of things, and I felt one of the central parts of the talk was you mentioned a teacher at your school asked you about what interested you, what you wanted to do, and you mentioned development, programming, and computers, and she went and bought an Apple IIe out of her own money and took a course on how to use the thing just to help you get started with your interests. And you mentioned in that talk, I want to help someone as much as she helped me. And that was a massive help. You probably, as a kid, you don't realize kids got no idea what's going around them. But that was a huge impact on your career, potentially the kickstart for your career. So if someone's listening into this thinking, I want to help too. I want to help someone in the same way I got helped. What suggestions do you have to help them get started in helping other people?
Okay. And it's something that I mentioned in the talk, right? So the way that Mrs. Mead helped me was so dramatic. I would love to help someone as much as she helped me, but it was such a transformative thing. I don't know that I can help a single person in that regard. So what I try to do is help as many people as I can in just small ways. And those ways could really be anything. It can be just offering like support, sometimes offering to listen. I think a great thing you can do is share what you know. As people are learning to develop, one of the best things you can do to learn is to teach. An example of that, I actually tutor quite a few folks using the 100 Days of SwiftUI. I think it's excellent coursework, and I go through oftentimes it's just like the first 12 days where we're kind of stepping through the beginning parts of it just to kind of help them out and get them going. And then once they get going, they can kind of go on their own, answer any questions, things like that. So basically, I think, and then towards the latter part of that talk, I also talk about the significance of being present in life and kind of really thinking about the moment that you're in. Life is surprisingly short. So when you have the opportunity to connect with someone, it's really important to kind of be empathetic and listen and think about, okay, what can I do to just help this person just a little bit along their path, help them in kind of any way. And the thing about it is this: sometimes you don't always know, sometimes it won't be apparent. But what you do is you just prepare yourself and be open to it. So when the opportunity arises, and it will, I'm going to offer my services to help. And sometimes that's just a little bit of time. So,
and you're right. If you are prepared and you are present, the opportunity will arise, because the opportunities are kind of coming and going every day, a lot every day. And as long as you are ready for that to happen and you are there for it to happen, you can grab it. And,
absolutely, yeah.
My eldest daughter now is 10, and she's about to go into high school, senior school, and sometimes she doesn't always do her best at schoolwork, and she struggles a little bit to find motivation. And she's a kid; she doesn't kind of realize that the older you get, the more you kind of have this sort of library of regrets on things you missed out on. I didn't prepare for this. I wasn't there for that. I didn't take this opportunity when I saw it, and I didn't grab it with both hands and run with it. And regrets, such a painful emotion. It's really, really bad. I mean, if you try and fail, it sucks. You'll have flashbacks the rest of your life that time you did something in public and fell over on the ice skates, whatever it is, right? It's there. But regret, wow, that is a painful, painful thing to have. So,
regret. Particularly the things you didn't do, the things you didn't try, the times you could have helped but did not. And the fantastic thing is, if you just approach things with that way, you actually will never have any idea how many people you end up helping, right? Incidentally, there's small things you can say to a person that can completely cascade. You can change their moment, you can change their day. In the case of Mrs. Mead, she changed my life. But the more you just pretty much set the intention that what I'm going to do is contribute, the more you do. I got this from a movie, but it's absolutely true. The world is always changing in the largest of ways by the smallest of things. So if you do small things, they just kind of grow over time. You make a habit of helping out in small ways. Eventually, those small things will grow into bigger things, and people will pay that forward to other folks. So the thing is, I mentioned earlier on, I think that I love coding, but coding is it's ephemeral. You do it today, a few years down the line, Apple makes something else, and this thing you have is no longer relevant. But the things that you do to have authentic connection and benefit other people, those things are long lasting. They last beyond even the relationship between you and that person, because they will pass that on to other strangers, other friends, other family. And as this kind of energy kind of gets going, it kind of grows exponentially. So, yeah.
Yeah, I want to say it was Eleanor Roosevelt, but I'm probably way off here. About folks will forget what you said, but they won't forget how you make them feel. And this is powerful stuff. You can teach someone, of course you can. You can teach them iOS 14 and Swift 5.3 or who knows what, right? And that's important. That'll help their career and get them somewhere.
For sure.
But if you show them and model to them empathy, I'm going to care about you and walk alongside you and help you reach your goal and work through your problems with you and work through your challenges with you. And whatever your goal is, I'm going to help you take a step towards that. You're passing on a lot of love to them, but also hopefully they'll pay it forward and pay it forward and pay it forward. And it does spread remarkably well. Daniel Steinberg says, Maya Angelou, sorry. Another, she's a whole mine of amazing quotes all by herself. So there you go. So thank you, Daniel. So I want to zero in on one thing you mentioned there, because I think it's particularly interesting and often confused by people, which is the best way to learn is to teach. And
yes.
I said at the beginning, Ish has a long career at this point of being a developer. Of course, you're thinking, yeah, Ish, of course he can teach, he can mentor, whatever. But I want to make it clear to folks listening along, this advice applies to many more people than you might realize. If you are even 6 months into your iOS development career, you already know enough to help out someone on 0 months or 1 month. In fact, you are in a better position in many respects than I am, or even Ish is, because you understand the new pains they're going through that we kind of just go, oh yeah, it's that thing, it's just fine that way. You see these things. And so if you are 6 months, 1 month, whatever it is, into this thing, you can still help out others. You can still teach others. You can still write a blog post about what you've learned and pass it on that information. And in doing so, you will also learn. You will also think, why is that the case? And do a bit of research and find out more about it. And you benefit, the reader benefits, everyone benefits. It's really powerful advice there from Ish.
And I would say even shorter than that, right? So you have a couple of fantastic courses, the 100-day series, right? If you're on day 2, you have more knowledge than the person who is on day 1. So there's something that you know that they don't. You can be really, really small. You can help a person just 1 day behind you, or sometimes even the same day, if you understand the concept differently than they do. You can have a discussion about it and just kind of go from there. It can be really, really, really tiny, but have a dramatic impact. And just that bit of reaching back to help someone gives them encouragement of like, hey, someone else even cares that I'm doing this, right? So now I'm actually more invested in what I'm doing. Just the accountability of someone else just even cares. So there's a lot you can do.
One of the advice I give in that course is don't lone wolf it. Don't try and get through. Like, I'll power through. Just me. I know what I'm doing. That's the worst thing you can do. Go to Twitter. Use this hashtag 100 days SwiftUI, whatever it is. You'll find other folks doing the same course, or have done the same course, or are behind you, or whatever. You will build a network of people who are interested, engaged in you, and care about you, and will share their results and share their code. You will learn way more if you share what you're doing. It's such a powerful way to work. Also in that talk, you had some advice on learning. And you said the best way to start is with curiosity. Be curious about something and then go from there. Now, how do you think that applies to developers, particularly because, I mean, I think we're fairly curious people naturally, because our platform's always changing. Like once a year, Dub comes out, bang, 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 huge new updates to go, wow, this cool new thing from Apple. Our industry is constantly changing. So how does starting with curiosity apply to developers, do you think?
Honestly, I think that being that way keeps you on your toes and keeps you engaged in the new thing and helps you to predict the future. There are some folks who are really happy with, I've learned a thing, I understand this thing, I'm done. I don't need to learn new things. But it's not true because the world moves whether you do or not. So it's important to stay engaged and try new things. Is SwiftUI ready for production? There's really one way to find out. Honestly, you go in and you start playing with it and you try it and you see what parts work and don't work for you, and then engage with other people about it. Don't just sit back and wait for everything to mature to the point where you're like, okay, now is my time. If you have the time to engage in things like this, I think it's important to always approach it like, if I was starting today, what would I do and why? Just to kind of get like a different perspective on it. I also think it's good, being like a seasoned developer, to stay in constant communication with junior developers who are just starting, because the perspective is different, and that broader perspective is always helpful.
Yeah, you mentioned just briefly there, if you have time. I think this is one of the things our industry still struggles with. We still have this bizarre preconception of the best person to hire for a role should be someone who is coding in their spare time and at weekends and going to conferences and speaking at conferences and has multiple GitHub open source projects under their belt and so forth. And it causes a huge range of problems because it basically narrows it down to young white men. you know, if you have come from a poorer background, if you are a woman who happens to have childcare or elder care responsibilities, if you haven't got the cash to have a laptop at home, for example, it excludes whole ranges of people for no reason. And we end up in a situation where people hire folks who look just like them, went to the same school as them, has the same CS degree as them, and it becomes this horrible self-reinforcing mess. And if we can break this down and say, hey, listen, you haven't got to code in your spare time. Like, coding could be your job. You could be paid to this, and you do it because it pays really, really well. But in your spare time, you like playing the guitar, or you like roller skating, or you like cross-stitching, or you like, I don't know, mountain biking, whatever it is you like doing. It's not coding. And that's cool. You can still come and join our company and do great work here. We'd love to have you. Until we get to there, I think we've still got a lot of social issues to work through, I think,
I think absolutely. There's a lot of stigmas that I hope are getting better over time. I've seen some of them, but there's a lot of like gatekeeping, etc. on like, this is how things are done because we have this established culture, which I think is really like kind of the wrong way to approach it. I think that coding is a tool and a skill set, and it can apply to various interests, and people can use it in various ways and not do it full time. There's a comment that people often ask about getting a CS degree or having a CS degree. One is, do I need a CS degree, or I don't have a CS degree, will I be able to do this, etc. And I've tweeted about this a couple of times, but the way I look at the CS degree bit is it's like going to culinary school. Right? You don't need to go to culinary school to make a delicious meal or to feed the hungry. That doesn't mean there's not room for that, right? If you're going to open up a restaurant in New York, you probably want to have a chef that's been to culinary school because there's additional things involved in that, right? But there's a whole lot of other things you can do that don't require that. In fact, you could start off as like working in fast food and decide, you know what? As I grow, I actually want to learn more about this. And eventually I'm going to learn culinary arts and do this other thing. You can evolve, or you can just be like, you know what? I have a restaurant. I'm happy. I've not gone to culinary school, but I have a happy customer base. I'm providing some service, and that's enough. I think there's like a really broad range of skill sets, and there's really room for everyone. I don't really think there's a need to kind of gatekeep on either side. Not that CS degrees are useless. That's not true. CS degrees are required. That's not true. It's a broad range.
Yeah, and let's face it, life would be significantly poorer if we didn't have, food trucks on the streets, right? It doesn't always have to be cordon bleu French haute cuisine, right? There's a whole range of cuisine we want to have in our lives, and having that range of backgrounds, range of experiences enriches our community. Bringing a wider range of folks in enriches our community in so many ways.
Absolutely. Yep.
Another tip I really thought was important in your talk was big things start out small. And
Yeah.
there's a quote I use a fair amount from Linus Torvalds, the creator of Linux, who was asked, what is your advice for someone who wants to start a big project? And his advice was, don't start big projects. Start small projects, and they grow big. That's how they work, And
Absolutely.
I think so many folks struggle with this. They think, oh, wow, I've used Pokemon Go, and it's amazing. I want to make Pokemon Go just with my thing instead, or I want to build my own social media like Instagram or something else that's really, really big, and that's their big project idea, but it's very hard to get there. And when you have a big idea, when I want to get to this thing, how do you break it down into steps that can actually be achieved by mere mortals?
Honestly, that's really the key to like break it down into smaller steps. Like break it down into, even before I realized that in CS there's like story pointing and such, and user stories with UX. I always thought of things as stories. So here's a person. They're gonna go on this journey, but there's a step to every journey. What are the steps? So kind of follow that. I'm going to do this step, make sure this step is going great, and do the next step, next step is going. Just do it a little bit at a time, right? Yeah, it's almost like the Tao Te Ching, which is basically a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So you basically figure out, here's the destination I want to get to, what are the steps, and just take a step, and then another step, and another step as you go.
In fact, that applies to so many things in life I've found, because I remember years ago I had to go on managerial training. To manage a team, you have to go on managerial training in my company. And they were saying, listen, there are two ways of setting goals for your team or your company or your product. And one is the Olympic high jump method, where it's like, I'm going to jump 1.8 meters, now 1.85, now 1.9, 1.95, 2, whatever it is, going up the increment. And in business, that is basically what we did last year plus some more. That thing, bit more. That thing, bit more. And the other method is, I'm going to just go for this target and figure out how to get there, as opposed to going step by step by step. I'm going to get to, this is my ultimate goal, work towards that, as opposed to incrementing what I had previously. And you're absolutely right. If you set your actual goal up front, this is what I plan to make, and then break it down, you'll do better. As opposed to this kind of trendy thing we have of minimum viable product. We kind of ship something that kind of works, maybe does a bit of the thing, but doesn't really sing, doesn't really come to life.
Right. I really like the idea of the minimal lovable product, because you get the smallest thing you can make that actually, like, I like this. This is fun. I enjoy this. This is doing what I need to do. And it also has like a feeling of satisfaction behind it too.
Yeah. And finally, finding a purpose in life. Finding, this is what like a calling. I'm destined to do with my life. It might be just chance, it might be opportunity, it might be preparation. A lot of folks feel that they are struggling to find their purpose. Was it Wear Sunscreen, the sort of vocal thing from years ago about, some of the most interesting people don't know what they want to be when they're 40 years old. And it's true. It's sometimes very hard to find a purpose. What advice do you have to someone who's listening right now who is genuinely struggling to find their purpose in life?
What I would first say is, don't necessarily tie your purpose to your income, your job, and your career, because those things aren't always aligned, right? I think that some people can sometimes that works out fantastically for some folks, but other folks not. It could be something else. You basically find it by just like feeling it, like what makes you happy, what brings you joy. Spend more time doing those things and figuring out how you can share those things with other people. That's pretty much it. Like in your core, what makes you happy, what brings you joy, and then how can you share that joy with other folks?
Yeah, and Ish is right here. It's not necessarily attached to money. The money might come from it, but often you'll find yourself being passionate about something you had no idea you'd even have an interest in. There was a brilliant talk, I forget the chap's name, but he was talking about how the best tax lawyers in America fly private jets. And they earn silly amounts of money. They've got a wide selection of activities they can do, and and you can bet they are totally passionate about tax law. But they weren't like born that way. You meet no kids saying, "I can't wait to be a tax lawyer one day." But in some respects, getting the results, getting the acclaim, getting the feedback, and getting at some point the wealth as well, may actually make you passionate about the thing you were doing. It can go in any sort of direction. It's not like you're born to this thing always. If you are very, very fortunate. Well done. Go with it. But it can come in any sort of way. And be prepared. Back to the earlier thing Ish said. Be prepared and be present. And you never know what happens.
And also, it could be an evolution of things, right? You might not always know. Kind of like in the Steve Jobs talk, where he's like, sometimes the dots connect looking backwards, but you can't see them going forward, right? Yeah, so I think it's kind of a combination of all that.
Okay, Ish, thank you so much for your time. It's been awesome having you here. Thank you to everyone who attended, asking questions. Where can folks find you on the internet?
You can find me almost all the time, too much of the time, on Twitter. So at Ish Shabazz. I'm at Ish Shabazz on like every social thing, but I basically spend all my time on Twitter. I also encourage you, if you have time, to check out that talk. It's about 25 minutes, but I think, and I'm not hugely like into self-promotion that much, but I really do think that it's an excellent talk and can serve to help pretty much anyone out. So I encourage you to take a look at it, and that's on YouTube, which you can link to from my Twitter also. Yeah.
I'll put in the show notes below. Once again, thank you to Fernando Olivares for sponsoring Hacking with Swift this week. He's got a new book out helping you take your Swift skills further and build bigger and better iOS apps. Again, it'll be in the video description shortly. If you enjoyed this talk, thanks for coming, folks. Subscribe. Hit the like button. It's been great having you here, and hopefully I'll see you for the next episode in a week or so. Take care, folks. Bye.